Hello, I'm Simon Over, Principal Guest Conductor of the Dunedin Symphony Orchestra. Greetings from London during this strangest of times. How wise was your government to shut down before the virus got out of control? I do wish our politicians would follow Jacinda Ardern's lead on this, and indeed many things. I was in New Zealand when she was elected and watched it all on the television with fascination. I was sure she would be a great statesman, and irrespective of politics, what has impressed me is the dignified way she has dealt with all the major crises. I was very glad that it was she who opened our splendid Hanover Hall a couple of years ago. A politician we can admire is such a rarity these days. As Principal Guest Conductor, I usually conduct one or two of the international series concerts each year. I'm at the end of a phone or Skype or Zoom call to advise on artistic matters, and I have been involved in auditions of principal seats in the orchestra. In addition to the concerts in the town hall, I've done concerts at King's and Queen's Performing Arts Centre, taken the orchestra on its first international tour to Japan, representing Australia and New Zealand, and last year I conducted the orchestra in its first performance in an excellent new concert hall in Queenstown as a project of the recently established Turn Up the Music Trust. We were delighted to have been asked to be part of the Trust's plan to help strengthen music resources in the Queenstown and Lakes District, doing workshop for children in the afternoon and a regular concert in the evening. I was really looking forward to the Beethoven series this year. As a youngster, I enjoyed in particular the big symphonies, but as I got older, the gentle, exquisite, ethereal aspects of his music have drawn me closer, and particularly they're to be found in the concertos. I've done the violin concerto many times, including with the DSO and Bella Christova some years ago. They're always memorable. On that occasion, as well as the intoxicating combination of brilliance and beauty in Bella's playing, the concert stands out in my mind because she specifically requested Beethoven's alternative cadenza for violin and timpani. It's not often performed. I'm no great fan of cadenzas, especially if they go on too long and go a long way from the real music, but this made it much more interesting. I've conducted the work with two different French violinists who take care of minute details, with a British player who approached it from an authentic performance practice angle, and I was due to conduct it in Italy in July, but sadly due to the current crisis, this has now been postponed for a year. I always try to persuade the soloist that it's as much about the bassoon as the violin, but that never goes down well. For example, in the last movement, the violin has the tune first, and then when the bassoon takes it over, I believe the violin should dance around the bassoon with filigree lightness, whereas some soloists believe that they are the soloists, so they should be the dominant voice at all times. This is a good example of how I think it should be. The third piano concerto is also full of translucent beauty if approached in the right way. There's a particular Beethoven piano and orchestra texture when the orchestra has warm chords and the piano is floating above like fresh water from a spring. At the end of the 19th century and the beginning of the 20th century, performance practice didn't necessarily serve Beethoven well, making his music much heavier than we like to play it today, and giving him a reputation for being loud and rumbustious. But when all the colours have space to shine through, his music is in turns glorious, powerfully moving and sensuous. The choral symphony, which I was due to be doing in August, is of course a monumental work and always popular. Alongside the orchestra and my friends in City Choir Dunedin, there was to have been a glorious array of soloists, including Annalise and Jonathan Lamalu, both locals of course, and both of whom spoke to me about Dunedin years before I had the good fortune to visit myself. Jonathan and I were backstage before a recital we were doing in the Buxton Festival, and he told me about this exotic sounding place which had similarities to and connections with Edinburgh, and about his time as a chorister at St Paul's Cathedral there. Over the last 12 years since I've been coming to Dunedin, Whenever I've seen Jonathan, we've talked about it, but we haven't performed together in Dunedin. So I really hope that he will be free to sing with us if and when the concert is rescheduled in 2021. Whilst British music suffered something of a lull in the 19th century with Europe very much to the fore, I'm proud to say that the work was commissioned by the Royal Philharmonic Society of Great Britain, a society of enlightened people who understood the importance of supporting the arts. On that subject, thanks so much to all who have continued to support this terrific orchestra through these difficult times. It's at times like this, of course, that we need culture more than ever, and sadly it can be the first thing to suffer. Please do continue to give all you can. I'm really proud of the DSO and mention it as often as I can as I travel. I really hope that all who are closer geographically to it will likewise express what a jewel it is in Dunedin's crown at every opportunity and encourage people to support it. After the Queenstown concert last year, I took off from the local airport bound for Auckland, then London. I looked down as we ascended, thinking, what a stunning country is yours and how fortunate am I to visit regularly and work there. I couldn't have imagined at that moment that within 4 months there would be a virus beginning to spread across the world, and within 6 months the whole world would be locked down. It gradually got more and more serious over here. In January, I had to visit Slovenia to do a recce for some concerts next year. We flew in and out of Venice airport, and I felt I couldn't be so close to Venice, one of my favourite cities, without calling in. Just as I arrived, they were starting to close down northern Italy, so I had my temperature taken before going through passport control. Venice was like a ghost town. The locals were thrilled. They had their beautiful city to themselves in a way they'd never known. A month or so later, and London started to lock down. And then on Mothering Sunday, about the 22nd of March, I think, after an energetic start to the day, I was out in the woods with the family and suddenly had to lie down in the grass. Whilst the family went fishing, I slept there for 2 hours with apparently other people climbing over me, looking at me as though I was some sort of rare species. Eventually I got up, stumbled home and slept for a week with high fever, loss of taste and smell, and an exhaustion that took at least 4 weeks to disappear. I had a secondary infection which felt like nails were being bashed through my skull. Much better now, but still run out of steam by the end of the day. In some ways, the lockdown has been good for me, having worked a 7-day week for years, given that I often work on Saturdays and Sundays. Now it feels more like a 7-day weekend. With online schooling to supervise for the older two and no nursery for the 2-year-old, there's plenty to do. My wife, Kate Kennedy, who came with me to Dunedin to introduce Gallipoli to the song a few years ago, has been writing a biography of wartime poet and composer Ivor Gurney. The lockdown has afforded her the time to finish it, and it's to be published by Princeton University Press in February, all 600 pages. We don't yet know what shape the coming out of lockdown will take, but we expect that string players will be playing together again first. The concern is, of course, for the wind players, the breathing and the spit. As one of our former horn players once said when I commented on the pool of water around their seat as they emptied their tubes, spit happens. The Germans have it very well organised, recommending 1.5 metres distancing for strings, about twice as much for woodwind, and huge distances for brass players. The Vienna Philharmonic recently held a study into how far musicians' breath travels when playing instruments. It showed they face no added risk of transmitting the coronavirus when performing. Their players took part in an experiment involving devices being inserted into their noses, which made a fine mist visible when they breathed, with the conclusion that air exhaled by wind players is unlikely to reach further than 80 centimetres. I'm not sure where that leaves us. One positive effect of the crisis is that it has inspired generosity. A former member of South Bank Sinfonia, my training orchestra in London, who is now a first violinist of the Royal Opera House Orchestra, contacted me the other day to say that the Opera House players had offered to give free online lessons for all our South Bank players, connecting them all to players in their section. Seeing such generosity of spirit is heartwarming indeed, and I really hope that it will continue long after lockdown is lifted. I've been asked what is the first thing I'll do when it is lifted. Well, I'll visit my 92-year-old father and then make music with some friends. Of course, meeting or socialising online is better than nothing, but not at all as good as being in the same room and breathing the same air. The online mashups are similarly better than no music at all, but they do also highlight what is missing and the great joy of being in the same room together, breathing the same air, listening carefully to each other's breathing, intonation, and adjusting to blend, finding a common voice. What joy it will be to be able to rehearse and perform together again, and especially for me, to be able to travel to Dunedin, see my dear friends there, and for us to make music together. Until then, I hope you stay well, and I look forward to seeing you again.